with you. As you know, I'm a longtime participant in your meetings. I love them when they're in person and I get that wonderful breakfast. But in light of the fact that we still are dealing with everything else, we are going to do this way. And let me get right to it, and then I'll welcome your questions. The first thing I have to say is that you all know we are involved in an intensive heat wave. I want it to be very clear that this heat wave is unfortunate for us, but the world is being affected as well. Last night, I talked about the tremendous problems they are having in Pakistan, the tremendous issues which they have on the East Coast. Wherever you go, you can see the impact of global warming. We are seeing it now in terms of sea level rise. Take a look at what's happening in the Arctic. Take a look at what's happening in Greenland. So last night was very interesting for me because I did 2 hours on this, and you'd be amazed how many people call and say there's no global warming. It doesn't exist. It's a complete myth. It's made up by left-wing Democrats primarily, and that it is really not a factor. In fact, I had somebody assure me that this kind of weather is routine, particularly here in San Francisco. As a fourth-generation San Franciscan, I have to tell you, I sort of giggled at that. So I don't want to deal with global warming in the broader sense, but I just want you to be aware, if there is an existential threat to our civilization, I'm not talking about the life on the planet, because life on the planet will continue no matter how hot or how cold in one form or another. We're talking about the existential threat to our way of life, to our civilization, and that is something we have to consider. The most peculiar thing to me is the denial by so many of the fact that there is something going on, and may I be blunt, the selfishness of people who say, après moi le déluge. I mean, this is something to me which I find very peculiar. Now, let's put global warming and the heat aside, and let's talk about what's going on in the world today. Last night, I had planned to spend 3 hours on the issue of global warming. The last hour I devoted to the story in the Washington Post. All of you know that last night, the Washington Post revealed that the materials at Mar-a-Lago represent a tremendous national security threat. Now, you will recall when the whole thing broke, there was discussion about nuclear information, which was at Mar-a-Lago, and which Trump assured us was not the case. It was a myth. Turns out that, in fact, there is and was nuclear information stored at Mar-a-Lago, including, according to the reports, detailed information on another nuclear power and the source of their nuclear situation without elaborating on who the country is. We also know that national security was severely jeopardized because some of the material taken at Mar-a-Lago is not even available to people with the highest security clearances. This is a very serious matter. Now, a lot of you were aware that on Monday, on Labor Day, I went in and did a 3-hour stint on KGO, even though it was a holiday. We resolved that it was important to come in because of the appointment of a master to go over all of the documentation. There are a lot of mixed feelings about it. The judge, who is a Trump nominee, who was a member of the Federalist Society, who has been an apologist for Donald Trump, who did not receive a favorable rating from the ABA, all of those things are well known. But what we have to deal with are the facts on the ground. By Friday, a judge or an attorney or someone will be appointed to oversee the sorting and going through these documents. I have to tell you that the FBI has already done it. You may know it's all complete. This is what we are told. And that is what really shocked me when the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, the man who served in the Oval Office, stood up at a rally on a Saturday evening and blasted the FBI as vicious people who were out to get him. And even the accusation being made that documents were planted at Mar-a-Lago in order to incriminate Donald Trump. So let me separate a few things here. Number one, you may be for or against Donald Trump. That's your decision. I'm not here to tell you what your politics ought to be. But I pointed out on the radio that if this were Barack Obama, who had taken documents and had jeopardized, in the view of many, national security, every line on my board would have been lit by those blasting Barack Obama. The same people will not blast Donald Trump. I had a listener last night who sent me an email who said, is this the same Kool-Aid they served at Jonestown? So I don't want to get into a question of right or wrong, good or bad. I simply want to point something out. I'm an equal opportunity basher when I feel the American presidency is being violated. Some of you will recall that I called for Bill Clinton's resignation. I was outspoken about it because I felt he had violated the trust of the American people and lied to the American people. You all know that I worked for Richard Nixon for many years. I still maintain ties with many of those around Richard Nixon, those of us who are still alive, and many of the scholars dealing with the issues relating to the Nixon years. What Nixon did is nothing, in my judgment, compared to what Trump has done. But let me point out to you that I had no hesitation in being critical of Richard Nixon, no hesitation in being critical of presidents with whom I've disagreed. I say this respectfully so you understand I'm not approaching this from a partisan point of view. It wouldn't bother me if this were the most liberal Democrat or the most conservative Republican. But I want to say a word now about the Republicans. And I did a commentary on this, which will be posted, I believe, today on 810, dealing with the challenge within the Republican Party. Some of you who are old-time San Franciscans, some of you who have known me over many decades, know that once upon a time I was a Republican. I was president of the Teenage Republicans here in San Francisco. I was on the Republican State Central Committee, the youngest member of the Republican State Central Committee. I served on the Republican County Committee. I was someone who was deeply involved in Republican politics. I have been called by Richard Norton Smith, Thomas E. Dewey's biographer, a scholar of modern republicanism, by Stanley Hilton, who wrote the biography of Bob Dole, the leading scholar on the Republican Party. My credentials as someone who has studied and talked and, frankly, had the opportunity to teach classes on the Republican Party, well, I've done that all over the country. The Republican Party is in the midst of a crisis. There was an article yesterday published in the New York Times stating that the future of the Republican Party is in jeopardy. Let me quickly tell you, the Republican Party has had civil wars before. You will, from your history, know that William Howard Taft and Theodore Roosevelt went to war against each other in 1912 and split the Republican Party, and the victor in the end was a Democrat, Woodrow Wilson. You know that if you are old enough to remember, or you've heard the stories of the battle in the Republican Party over isolationism in 1940. And the only reason that an internationalist triumphed in the 1940 Republican Convention in Philadelphia was because the Nazis, the Germans, took France at the end of June of 1940. We saw a battle between Eisenhower and Taft in 1952, again pitting a liberal wing and a conservative wing. I was present at the Republican National Convention held here in San Francisco in 1964, where we witnessed a battle between the liberal wing of the party, led by Nelson Rockefeller, and the conservative wing, led by Barry Goldwater, and Barry Goldwater and the conservatives won. I could give you history of the Republican Party. I have no problem with the fact that there are tensions within a political party, that there are really outspoken differences between people of ideology. But I would remind you, at the last election, the Republican Party did not write a platform. It simply said whatever Donald Trump says is what we agree with. That is not a legitimate two-party system, nor is that a legitimate way to conduct politics. I would say that if it were someone I really believed in on the other side, you have to have a written platform and real debate. The Republican Party is now in jeopardy, and all of you understand what I mean by that. The Republicans should have been the odds-on favorite to take both the House and the Senate in the midterm elections. I can say with almost absolute certainty, although nothing is certain in love, war, and politics, that the odds are that the Democrats will retain control of the United States Senate, in part because the Republicans have backed candidates selected by Donald Trump, who I don't think are electable in a variety of states. The House of Representatives, which should have gone Republican by 40, 50 seats, now is up for grabs. And our own Nancy Pelosi is being told by her own membership, if the Democrats retain control, they want her to remain as Speaker. Adam Schiff just said that. I can only tell you, I am heartsick at what has happened to the Republican Party, because I want a vital, vibrant two-party system in this country. Let me say a word about something that Donald Trump Jr. said on the ellipse on January 6th. He said, "It is no longer the Republican Party. It is the party of Donald Trump." I do not believe that we should ever have a political party that is based on one person or one person's views. That's not what a party is. Look, let me sum it up very clearly. For a bird to fly, you need two wings, right? You clip a wing, what have you got? They can't fly. That's what's happened not only to the Republicans, but to the Democrats as well. Once upon a time, there was a liberal wing of the Republican Party and a conservative wing. Same thing applied in the Democratic Party. Now what you have really are ideologically locked party in which there is very little debate or argument. I want to say a word about what is mobilizing people for the Democrats. I think it is the issue of a woman's right to choose. Some people call it abortion. I don't think that's the issue at all. I think the question of a woman's right to choose is what is at stake. The Supreme Court decision overturning Roe, the Dobbs decision, has mobilized American women, and I'm not surprised. Those of you who listened to me when the decision came down, I suggested at the time that there would be a backlash. You saw it in Kansas. In Kansas, a conservative Republican state, a state which went overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, a state which, frankly, should logically be a lock for the Republicans. Well, you saw the move on abortion in Kansas to codify it, go down to a crushing defeat, 60-40. Why? Because women understand what it means when a constitutional right is taken away. Because women understand that their right to choose how to deal with their own bodies is so critical. This is an issue which is, I think, of tremendous motivation and is going to come back to haunt the Republicans. They are behind now because of one issue, and that is the issue of a woman's right to choose. Let me say a word about inflation and the economy. I think everybody listening to the sound of my voice remembers inflation in 1979, 1980. You can remember the crisis of Jimmy Carter. And yes, that during the first year and two of Ronald Reagan's administration, inflation was high. And what happened? Excuse me, nothing to sneeze at. What happened was that the American people embraced what Ronald Reagan was trying to do because they thought that it would reduce the danger of inflation under Jimmy Carter. When I got the first loan on this house, it was at 15%. And I remember those days of high inflation and gas prices. So let me just try to be crystal clear about this. The American people care about their pocketbook. There's no doubt about it. But if you attack their personal freedom, the American people are not willing to accept that. And that to me is the key in all of this. Let me continue in terms of foreign policy. The invasion by Russia of Ukraine has created a major danger for all of us. Those of you who listened to the report this morning from the UN on the nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and you understand clearly that if something goes wrong there, it will make Chernobyl look like child's play. I don't know what we can do to contain what is happening, but I do know this. NATO is now stronger, not weaker. When you have Finland and Sweden joining NATO, and may I say, under the leadership of Joe Biden and international response to the Russians on Ukraine, I think it is quite a remarkable moment, quite a remarkable event. We have serious problems in the world. There's no doubt about it. And we have serious problems in our own country. But on balance, the reason that Joe Biden is doing better is because he has a successful track record. Take a look at the infrastructure bill, for instance. Take a look at the healthcare situation, all of these things. Joe Biden has responded, and he's had at least 6 major legislative accomplishments, which nobody thought he could get. Now, here's the rub. The rub is that if you have a Republican minority in the House and Senate, and they keep saying that they are the minority, but they are an obstructive minority, and they have the ability, well, to prevent things from happening. The Democrats were very lucky that Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, two Democratic senators who tended not to agree with much of what Joe Biden was doing, finally caved on key legislation. I say this because I want you to understand that what has happened is amazing. And now we have to wait and see how the American people judge this come November. I don't want to make a prediction because the predictions generally are bad. We always remember President Dewey, and it didn't happen. Things that appear certain. The best example I can give you is 1994. If you had told me on election day 1994 that the Democrats would lose the House and the Senate in what became known as the Republican Revolution, I wouldn't have anticipated it, and I don't think anybody else would either. It was an earthquake in American politics. Are we looking at that kind of earthquake now? Let me summarize the political thing, and then I'm happy to take whatever questions you have by saying this. Oh, I want to talk about a little local politics in a moment, but let me quickly just conclude on the national politics by saying this. The American people have a choice. It's a choice, not an echo, as the old Goldwater slogan went. The American people are going to choose a path. And when President Biden spoke in Philadelphia, and some of you may have listened to my broadcast about that. We broadcast it live at my insistence because I wanted people to hear what he had to say. I also broadcast much of what the Republican leader, Mr. McCarthy, said, because I think people have a right to know the response. I agreed with Joe Biden 100%. I have never been as afraid for the future of my country as I am now. And that fear is based on the fact that the Republican Party seems to be sleepwalking. Sleepwalking in the direction Donald Trump wants it to go. And that's something that everyone, even if you agree with Trump's policies, should be resisting. You don't want to have a one-person party or a one-directional party. Now, let me say a word about San Francisco politics, if I can. You saw a recall of 3 school board members overwhelmingly. The reason you saw it was because of a deep unhappiness with the direction of the school board. We have a new superintendent. We have to hope that the new school board and the superintendent are able to work together in a constructive fashion. Roanne told you about my involvement with Washington High School. I think a few times ago when I spoke before you, I talked about the George Washington High School murals. We have managed thus far to save them. And we have a fund now to try to restore them and to create that educational curriculum, which the Board of Education mandated 50 years ago and which never happened. We are going to fulfill that pledge, that promise. But I do want to point out that we have serious issues dealing with the schools here in San Francisco. And we also have a question of corruption in San Francisco City Hall. And I want to be very clear about this. Something is not right. All of you know it. All you have to do is take a look at what happened with Mr. Nuru and the Department of Public Works. But there needs to be a real hard look at what is going on in San Francisco and the kind of leadership we have and the kind of direction in which we are moving. As somebody who loves San Francisco, I am horrified by what I am hearing and reading. I have had a number of programs on this subject, and it's fascinating how people respond to it. I think people love San Francisco, are deeply concerned about it, and we are going to have a very interesting few years. We'll see how deep the scandals go, but there is no doubt about it. And you see the people going to jail and the charges being filed. And all I can tell you is we in San Francisco deserve a lot better. Okay, why don't I stop now? I don't want to go on too long because I want to give you guys plenty of time to interrogate me. So why don't we proceed?
John, I have a question, if I might.
Please.
I can say that I think I've been a member of this club for over half my life, and you, without a doubt, are the most interesting speaker we have come speak to us on a regular basis. God bless you, and I hope you stay around forever.
Me too.
My question is, I bought Dwight Chapin's book yesterday, and I haven't read it obviously yet, but I did read the flyleaf, and it said that among other things, I mean, he was with Nixon everywhere, doing everything, but he went to prison even though he had no involvement at all in Watergate. Can you give us a little bit about your colleague Dwight Chapin and whether that's true or not?
Yes, I interviewed Dwight when the book came out. I was one of the first to do the interview, and you can get it online by going to the KGO website. I think they've got it marked somehow. Dwight Chapin's book is filled with insights. It is well worth reading. He traveled with Richard Nixon. He was with Richard Nixon. He was not involved in Watergate, but he wasn't truthful on several key elements. He admits that, says he did something wrong, and actually wrote the book in order to explain to his grandchildren, particularly a grandson, why he ended up where he did. And the moral of the story, I think if Dwight were here with us, he would say the moral of the story is tell the truth. It doesn't diminish, in Dwight's view, or in my view, many of the accomplishments of Richard Nixon. Whether you're talking about the war on cancer, whether you're talking about the opening to China, whether you're talking about détente, whether you're talking about the implementation of desegregation in the South, there were many things that Richard Nixon did well. But Richard Nixon, as he put it himself, he really screwed it up. Those are his words. And unfortunately, there were demons that Richard Nixon carried with him, which Dwight Chapin describes vividly in his book. So all I can tell you is, for those who are interested in Nixon, I'm happy to answer any questions. Many of you know I do a lot of that because I'm one of the few people who worked with the president who's still around. And when I interviewed Dwight, it was a real pleasure, sort of a reconnecting over many, many years.
John, Mike Milstein, the last time you were here, I asked if you had considered running for public office, and you said you were thinking about it. Any update on that?
Nope, still thinking. One never knows. Right now, I have a wonderful gig, Mike, and all of you know it. I am on KGO from 4 to 7. That's drive time, Monday through Friday. I do most of their political commentary. I'm having a great time doing it. And if ever I were to run for office, I would have to give it up because of the equal time provision. So if I decide ever to run for anything, I will do it at the last minute. And you will be the first person I call for a check, Mike.
This is Bert Hill. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I want to go local.
Sir.
Prop I and J. We have the ratio of children under 18 in our population is now down to 13.4%. It's never been that low before, and it's trending down. We are losing our children and our younger families. In that context, how do you feel about the two propositions?
Look, I consider affordable housing in San Francisco an oxymoron. There is no way to create affordable housing. The only thing we can do in San Francisco to bring young families here is to make sure the schools are the best they can be. The Board of Education's attempt to gut Lowell High School, and I'm from Washington, believe me, I bear no goodwill to Lowell. I have a son, however, who graduated from Lowell, and so I call him the traitor, but it's okay. Propositions aren't going to do it. Affordable housing, as I said, is an oxymoron. The house across the street from me sold last year for $5.9 million. Believe me, to me, it's inconceivable. Anybody have a house out on the Sunset? You can't find a house in the Sunset for under $1 million, even $1.5 million now. So my answer is, if people can't afford to live here, we got a problem. Now, I just got my copy of the Nob Hill Gazette, and I try to read everything. And there is a supplement in the Nob Hill Gazette for private schools here in San Francisco. And a lot of them, frankly, were Catholic educational institutions, which are fine with me. But think about what it costs if you own a home, you put your kid in a private school. Anybody know what it costs today to go to kindergarten in a private school? Is it $30,000? I think it's about 30 grand. I mean, for kindergarten, for God's sake. There is something wrong that cannot be corrected by a ballot measure, that cannot be corrected by a mayor or by the Board of Supervisors. But I can tell you that if I were on the Board of Education, and I'm not, if I were on the Board of Education, the top priority I would have would be to make sure our schools worked. And I must tell you, talk about demoralized people, talk about teachers in the school. You know, they don't even get their checks on time because they've got some screwed up accounting system at the public Board of Education. I mean, I'm absolutely befuddled by it because I am a product of public schools, as are my children. I went to Madison, Roosevelt, Washington. My children went to Lilienthal, Lowell, and Wallenberg. They got a great education, but I am very concerned. So if you ask me about flight from San Francisco, I have friends who just moved to Marin County because they feel their kids will get a better education in the Ross School District. And even though the house costs them a little bit more, they won't be paying a private school tuition. So all of the local propositions that deal with these questions amuse me, but I think have very little impact. I'm being very blunt with you.
Well, New York is twice the height as ours, and New York has the same housing restriction and not housing, the same housing limits as it, but San Franciscan children do not have the availability of being able to play nearby and in areas to play. And I think the social end of it is really important.
Well, you're right, but let me just point out, if you take a look at parks, and remember, I was the president of the Laurel Heights Improvement Association for 25 years, also the Laurel Heights Playground. There are playgrounds in every single neighborhood. You go to the neighborhood, you will find a playground. And Phil Ginsburg, who is the superintendent of parks, I've had differences with Phil on a variety of things, but I think he's done a splendid job. We have to make sure our parks are child friendly. We have to make sure, do you know that once upon a time, we had park directors in every park. So you had tennis, you had football, you had basketball, you had all the activities. We can't afford that anymore. We don't do it anymore. And I think it is a tremendous obstacle to life in San Francisco. I'm across the street from Laurel Hill Playground. They rented out the clubhouse to a private school. It's not available in the neighborhood anymore. There used to be a playground director there. There were tennis offerings there and basketball. There is something wrong with the way we are operating in the city. Now, let's assume for a minute that I ran for mayor and I wanted to correct it all. Even if I wanted to correct it all, I'm not sure that you can roll back the clock or do what needs to be done. But neighborhood by neighborhood, school by school, we have to try.
I'm going to add street to it, street by street.
Yep.
Just one point that I'd like to make about Nixon. Those of you that don't remember, he was the person who signed Title IX. And for that to me, I would add to his accomplishments.
Yep. This is the 50th anniversary of Title IX. It was acknowledged. I did a program on it, but you're right. People do not remember the good things. Any cancer survivors listening to the sound of my voice? The odds are you survived because of Richard Nixon. He pumped billions of dollars into cancer research, and nobody really acknowledges it. And by the way, national parks, Richard Nixon did more for the national park system than any other president. And if you talk to Native Americans, they will tell you Richard Nixon did more for them than any president, including restoring tribal lands to the First Nation peoples. But people don't know history, and frankly, history isn't taught. One quick note, and then I'll go back to your comment, and that is, when I graduated from high school, before you could go into the 12th grade, you may remember, before you could go into the 12th grade, you had to pass, let me click that off. You had to pass a civics test. You had to be able to pass a civics test. And that was done away with. If I had my way, I'd put it right back in. You want to go to the 12th grade, you have to pass a civics test.
Yeah, well, here's my other question, because we've certainly had some issues here. We had both Chesapeake in here and Brooke speak. This recall, I can't help it being from Chicago, but when I saw that the person who was like the person that was the a leader in it, and also I did a deep dive as to who funded the recall, which was very interesting. And now she is in that position.
Correct.
Give me a thought about that, because I do the thumbs on scale always. So
yeah, my answer is I interviewed Chesa because I believe in fairness. I didn't criticize anything more or less than the fact that all the people in his office were quitting. if you have everybody in your office quitting, it tells you something about the kind of administration you have. You can talk about his policies, but in the end, the people who worked for him didn't like him and didn't trust him. As for the new district attorney, I can only tell you, you're right. She did work. She was paid, it turns out, although not officially. The whole thing smacks to me of just being bad. And there are a lot of good people who could have been considered, but the mayor of San Francisco ultimately is the person responsible. And it'll be interesting to see, because the criticism of Mayor Breed is muted on so many levels. Only Susan Dyer Reynolds, who is the former editor and publisher of the Marina Times, and who I have on my program regularly, talks about that issue. And when you talk about who will run for mayor of San Francisco, what kind of candidate we want for a mayor, will London Breed have any real opposition? And what will that opposition be? You know, if I may be honest, the days when a Quentin Kopp could run for mayor or be an outspoken critic, we don't have those kind of people on the Board of Supervisors anymore. And whether you agreed with Quentin on a whole host of issues or not, he was outspoken and people knew who he was. Let me make my position clear on that. I am opposed to district election of Board of Supervisors. I believe it should be a citywide election. I think the parochialization of the Board of Supervisors has been a disaster. But I know, and if I ever ran for mayor, that will be one of the planks in my platform. But I know it will be opposed by many in San Francisco who prefer the district election system. I do not find it effective. And most of these supervisors are looking for a way to go up in politics. They aren't doing their job. And I'd say that publicly without any hesitation.
John, thank you so much for coming back. We're very excited. And also thank you for bringing up Roe v. Wade and Nixon and some of the other issues. As much as I dislike Donald Trump, he was a friend to Israel. And I would love for you to talk. You didn't mention Israel today, and I'd love for you to give some thoughts.
Now, look, I just finished reading 3 books dealing with Donald Trump and Israel. There's no question the Abraham Accords, which were initiated by Jared Kushner and David Friedman, who was our ambassador, worked remarkably well and have made major strides in the Middle East. And I commend the Trump administration for that aspect of what it did. I was a great critic, you will recall, of Jimmy Carter, but I gave him great kudos for his participation in the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. The Middle East remains a hot spot of contention. And all I have to say is most presidents of the United States understand that Israel is an ally of the United States and needs to be valued. Certainly Joe Biden understands it. Certainly Donald Trump understood it. We only had, we had 2 presidents in recent memory, George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter, who I think failed that test. But fortunately, Israel is a bipartisan issue in this country. Although I was shocked to read that at Bolt Hall, which is now the University of California Law School, they changed the name from Bolt, that they have a group there who will not have Zionists speak to their groups because Zionists are viewed as imperialists and racists. It didn't get a lot of press, a lot of publicity, but it's the lead story in the J Weekly this week, and I'd read about it several weeks ago. This is a real problem, but fortunately, and I say this with all due respect to everyone, peace in the Middle East is a lot closer, in part because of the Abraham Accords, in part because of the leadership of Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and yes, Barack Obama. There has been a consistent situation in recent years of American presidents. Sometimes I disagree with policy, sometimes I disagree with policy, but on balance, these are people who understand the value of Israel and its importance to the United States. May I quickly just diverge? We have a large Chinese community here in San Francisco. And some of you can remember the days when there were 2 flags flying in Chinatown. One was the nationalist flag and the other was the communist flag. And you could always, standing in a particular spot looking out at the flagpoles of San Francisco, see where people stood. The situation with Taiwan is very dangerous, very precarious. We have a lot of people who are of Taiwanese origin who live in San Francisco, and that is another major foreign policy issue. Our relationship with China is fraught with all kinds of very difficult dilemmas. As you know, the Chinese are building islands in order to claim certain parts of the Pacific. This is a real challenge to American foreign policy. If I had 2 or 3 hours, I would talk to you in depth about it. But let me make crystal clear, the American commitment to Taiwan is such that were there to be an attempt by the Chinese government to invade Taiwan, the United States would have to respond, and they would have to respond vigorously. It would not be like Afghanistan at all. It would be very different, or even our response in Ukraine. We have a firm commitment, and if we were to break that commitment, the question of America's reliability in the world would be severely questioned. So although I'm not here to speak on that particular subject, I think it's very interesting to note how important it is in terms of world affairs. I left you all breathless, eh?
Hey, John, I have a couple of questions maybe. I'm always been a big fan of Richard Nixon, and I find now that I'm terribly divergent in my politics from you. I think I disagree with you on most everything. Recently, I've been called everything from a deplorable to a semi-Nazi last week. I was threatened with F-15 fighter bombers dropping bombs on my house.
Don't worry, if you sat in my chair at KGO, you'd hear it all. Go for it.
Well, there are a couple of topics that you didn't bring up. I mean, with Donald Trump, we were energy independent. We now are at the mercy of people. We have a president now who's essentially asking the Saudis for oil, and he's selling some of our oil to China even, but that's not what I want to talk about. One subject that you did not mention is the open border that we have in the south of this country. Mm-hmm. We have 2 million people that have fled into this country in just this fiscal year, probably over 3.5 million that we know of that have been welcomed into this country since Joe Biden was inaugurated. And along with that are terrorists and enough fentanyl to kill every person in the United States. Let me answer. Are you in favor of these open borders, or what do you think?
Let me answer you very directly. We do not have open borders. That is a complete myth. In fact, Joe Biden has been turning people away, as you may know, and you may recall that the deporter-in-chief was not Donald Trump. The deporter-in-chief was Barack Obama. The myth of open borders, and I listen to right-wing, I suffer from low blood pressure. So I listen to Mark Levin and Sean Hannity and the others in order to keep myself stimulated. We do not have open borders, and that is simply not correct. However, it is a great talking point. Is it a crisis on the border? The answer is yes. Let me remind you that crisis existed under Donald Trump as well. And those who believed that a wall would protect America didn't know what they were talking about. You and I know that what remains of the wall meant absolutely nothing when it was effective, theoretically, and it never really was effective. I can only tell you the discourse over Donald Trump bothers me tremendously. I respect people who support Donald Trump, even if I don't agree with Donald Trump. You have a right to your opinion. But I can tell you, I am regularly called a communist or a fascist.
Not by me.
See, let me tell you, I'm telling you what we've descended into as a society. I believe in civil discourse. And if you call the John Rothmann program, 415-8080810, between 4 and 7, Monday through Friday, you will hear a civil discourse. Why do you think the Trump people call my program? They call not because I agree with them, but because they have an opportunity to speak. Name calling accomplishes nothing. And so when
I agree.
And so when you say to me there's an open border, trust me, there is no open border. It just doesn't exist. It does in the minds of the Sean Hannitys and the Mark Levins and the Laura Ingrams, but it's or Fox. You know, Fox is not news any more, by the way, than CNN is news. When I hear Fox News, I consider it automatically an oxymoron. And I listen with great care to what is said on the left and right, which is why I'm able to make, I hope, informed presentations. I do have very strong political views, obviously. Donald Trump is not my cup of tea. And if you support Trump's policies, God bless you, you better find another messenger, because Donald Trump is leading the Republican Party to disaster. And if you want a responsible Republican, there are good Republicans around with whom, frankly, I disagree ideologically. I would never, for instance, I would never vote for Liz Cheney for president. But I consider Liz Cheney.
Neither would I.
Yeah, but I consider her a profile in courage. I haven't talked about what happened on January 6th, and I want to spend just a minute on it. If you listen to the hearings, the January 6th hearings, you know that every single person who testified was a Trump supporter. They are not people who are Democrats or liberals or radicals. They were people appointed by Donald Trump. And I think it is very important to consider where we are in terms of accountability. There was an insurrection against the United States of America. There was an attempt to prevent the counting of the electoral votes on January the 6th. The vice president of the United States was threatened, and not once did the sitting president of the United States defend his vice president. Not once. There are things which are unforgivable. Now, I concede to you that there are things policy-wise that you may agree with Donald Trump on. God bless you. That is your right. And that I hope you continue to believe that. I hope you find a candidate other than Donald Trump, because it is clear to me that Donald Trump is the antithesis of American democracy. And that had he had his way, he would have subverted a free, orderly process. I ask people all the time, was the election of 2020 fair? The answer is yes, it was. And Joe Biden won decisively. And they can call for all the recounts in Arizona and Pennsylvania that they want to. It won't change the outcome. And we've seen that. We've seen Trump nominated judges, more than 60 courtrooms, throw these false claims out. I think the real case to watch, if you want to know the truth, is what's going on in Georgia, because they have Donald Trump on tape, not an imaginary view, but really saying what he believed. Find me a few more votes. I mean, this to me is intolerable. And may I tell you, just so you're clear, if this had been Joe Biden, I would be as indignant as I am about Donald Trump. What horrifies me is the fact that people do not understand the danger that Donald Trump represents. And that to me is what is so important to understand. What he said is and remains unacceptable to all of us, I hope. Next question. By the way, if I'm being too outspoken, I don't apologize at all.
Oh, might as well.
You don't have an
Right,
opinion.
as it is for all of us.
Okay.
Hey, Colin, go ahead.
Yeah. So, one of the things I've been noticing about, government in general is, particularly when it comes, let's take a specific case, the schools, which are always crying poor. But you look at like the salaries of the administrators and the expansion of the administration of these schools. And I, hear about like where the administrators outnumber the faculty.
And are you not talking about the San Francisco schools, are you?
Well, in general.
No, I'm talking general. I can't speak to the nation. I can speak about San Francisco.
Okay,
What
yeah,
you
go ahead.
described-
Speak, yeah, well, let's go specifically there, because I'm wondering how much bureaucratic bloat has to do with, the schooling system being in trouble.
I'll be blunt with you. The school system in San Francisco is severely broken. But I'm going to tell you what really hurts. It's not that kind of administrative hierarchy that worries me. Anybody out there have a kid or a grandchild who you want to be a teacher? You know that the toughest job is to be a teacher. And if you talk to the teachers of the San Francisco Unified School District, they are not treated well. And when I say treated well, I mean they are not respected. And their salaries are not, you can't afford to be a teacher in San Francisco and live in San Francisco. You realize that most of the teachers in San Francisco don't live here? It's a serious problem. I know, and you know, when you went to school, what inspired you? Your teachers, right? If you had a great teacher, it meant all the difference in the world. Do you know how many people I know who have been teachers in San Francisco who have left teaching? One became a fireman because he had a better deal as a fireman. He may have had to work a little harder, but he had a better pension, better healthcare, better everything. I have another friend who went to work for the Masons because he got a better deal with the Masons. You can go down the line of outstanding teachers who have given up. We need to support our teachers and we need to recruit them. You know, when I was in school, you actively were recruited for the teaching program at SF State or at the University of San Francisco. I went to Whittier College. They had one of the finest teaching programs in the country, and they went out and recruited people in Southern California to enter the teaching profession. We don't do that anymore. And I'm going to tell you that the real problem we are going to have in the days ahead is if we don't have good teachers in the classroom to work with our kids. And I know you're worried about administrators. I can't account for bloating. I can tell you when I went to school, there was one principal, there was a dean of girls, a dean of boys, and a high school counselor who ran the counseling department. That was a tight administration.
Yeah,
But-
well, that's, you know, how much money goes to administration that doesn't go to faculty?
You know, I couldn't quantify it for you. I'm not an expert on their budget, but I can tell you one thing for sure. Teachers are underpaid, undervalued, overworked, and criticized roundly when they do the best they can. And we are not getting, I don't care who the administrators are in terms of if they're good.
Well, they should be, you know, I mean, if administrators are bad, the school's gonna suck, right?
Yeah, you're right. And you know what? I'm not accountable for that. You're not accountable for that. The school district is. We have a new superintendent of schools in San Francisco. And I would hope he's going to go over this with a fine-tooth comb and really feel it. But let me just tell you, I'm on a conference call every Sunday for 2 hours, a Zoom call like this, with people who care about San Francisco education. That's not an issue which comes up. There's very little criticism of administrative rule here. There's a lot of criticism of the school board and the way in which it functions. And I can only tell you, if I, again, could wave a magic wand, I would, but I can only deal with the reality. Walk into a school. I don't know the last time you were in school, and frankly,
Yeah, I was. I actually I rehearsed in a school because one of the people in a cast was a teacher.
Right.
So we got, and it's like, yeah, I mean, the building itself, when I think about it, when I look at it, I mean, the architecture is oppressive. I mean, it's, you know, there was a great quote by a commentator, Michael Malice. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but it really reflected on me as a child when he said, public schools are literal prisons for children and the only place where most people experience violence in their lives.
Yeah, I can only answer you as somebody who went all the way through the public schools in San Francisco. That was not the case. And if you want to see a beautiful campus,
It was the case with me, unfortunately.
go out to Washington High School, take a walk around that campus. It's spectacular. Or I just spoke at Claire Lilienthal, one of the best teachers in the city passed away, Karen Hadley, and they built a gym there, which is now named after her. And I was asked to say a few words. And I don't do a lot of public speaking in public. I never go inside anywhere. It's always outside or by Zoom. But there are outstanding teachers. There are great things happening. I'm an optimist. I refuse to admit that a problem is not solvable. If we've got a problem in the schools, let's address not in generalities, but in specifics. I'll tell you when we had a problem. We had a San Francisco school board that wanted to change the names of Washington and Lincoln. They wanted to change 44 school names. And one guy, Paul Scott.
And get rid of a mural.
Yep. Paul Scott went to court over the name change and he won. We went to court over the murals and we won. I'm not afraid of a good fight, but I'm also not willing to say that everything that happens is bad. I don't know if you've watched a robotics program. We have a robotics program at Washington High School, one of the best in the country. Oh, they don't win all the great awards, but the kids love it and they're learning. And what I want to see in schools is the kind of inspiration we should have. Roanne was talking about the fact that I teach at the Fromm Institute. My job at the Fromm, and I'll be teaching again starting next week by Zoom, by the way, much to my regret, is to make sure that every time a student, no matter what their age, walks into a classroom, they have the best experience. It's just like what I'm trying to do for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, there's a, and yeah, there are some, I'm seeing more evidence of different schooling systems being set up and,
So
yeah,
we need to-
particularly.
let's accentuate the positive. And if there's a negative, I don't want a vague generality. I want to know when they tried to eliminate murals, we went to town and we won. At least so far we've won.
Okay.
When you need to have something done, that's what you have to do. Don't deal in generalities, in my judgment anyway.
Okay.
Next question.
I think we have time for one more question. It's 9 o'clock now.
What?
And,
How can the
I know.
time go so quickly? Good heavens.
I am amazed. It's been a fascinating presentation. Susan, I think you were calling out someone as a for a
Yeah, I
question.
think Betty has a question.
Okay, very quickly, and this is a quick answer, John. Thank you so much for being here. As usual, awesome. We love your knowledge. China, what do we do about China?
The only thing we can do about China is engage fully with China. They cannot be isolated. Somebody mentioned Richard Nixon. If you go back and you read Nixon's justification for opening the door to the People's Republic of China, he said you cannot isolate a nation of that many people. And so we have to engage with them. And leaders come and go. Gorbachev just died, okay? We're talking about Russia for a minute. Leaders can make a huge difference. And President Xi is not going to be president of China forever. And we have to hope that as China evolves, we get a better situation. The tragedy in Hong Kong is one which we all understand, those of us who work with the democratic forces there. I only wish I had answers for all of this, but I'm fully aware that these are big problems. I want to thank you. You know, somebody asked me whether I have a psychiatrist. The answer is no. I have the Golden Gate Breakfast Club. Unfortunately, I have 3 hours a day on KGA. But the important thing is that we're thinking and we're talking, and whether you agree with me or disagree with me is of little consequence. We have to engage, we have to think. My only regret is that we have such a short time. And of course, anytime you want me, it's very easy for me to come back to you via Zoom, and I'm delighted to do it. And to Susan Rowan, who made the contact and the arrangements, of my sincere appreciation. I am always cognizant that I used to be greeted by our good friend Ray Scioto. I commented last time I spoke to you at the tragedy of his death, but thank God we're all still here and keeping going. And thank you all very much for having me to the Breakfast Club.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Fabulous.
Wonderful.